Hey everybody, it's Monday and you know what that means. It's time to raid my lab. Arduinos, wow, big topic. Man, we've knocked out some big ones early on in the Raid My Lab series. For those of you who don't know how this works, when I push this button, which is usually connected, it will fire off a message that, the long story short, is that it will choose a random topic for me. So I have no idea what topics we're going to talk about every single Monday on this channel. And today we got Arduinos. And so the typical Arduino that you would get is the Uno. If you've gotten a starter kit, for the most part, you probably got an Uno. Here's an Uno just goofily hooked up to a whole bunch of LEDs in a Knight Rider pattern. The Uno is the basic Arduino that everybody thinks about. And so if you're like me, when you started thinking about these things, you would read articles like, well, Raspberry Pi versus Arduino, which one is better? And the general gist of the article would be, well, this is a computer that can do as many things as you want it to do. And this is a board that can basically do one thing over and over and over again. And I think that's kind of an oversimplification. But so I started off thinking, well, why would anybody want this when you could have this? Especially if you buy it directly from Arduino, they're not that much different in price. And so I would buy these, and the first thing I built majorly was a phone system. I did some work on phone systems on these things, and we were killing SD cards like crazy in the beginning. And so I was like, well, this thing just doesn't seem that reliable. And they're perfectly reliable now. I run them forever. But back when these first came out, I was like, yeah, I wasn't really in love with what they did. And so I bought a starter kit for an Arduino, and it was an Elegoo starter kit, very cool, and it blew my mind. I hooked up an LED, great, learned how to blink it, and then eventually I got into doing the LCD and the screens and all that kind of stuff. And what blew my mind about a board like this was just that, not that it only did one thing or only did a couple things, but that it did it over and over and over again reliably, and I didn't even have to think about it. And so I have these things all over the place in my shop and in my house, and just other projects I have, and they just do exactly what they're supposed to do. And I think that's fantastic. So the main board that everybody has is the Arduino. Now I want to say, as we get early on into this discussion, there's Arduino, and then there's Arduino. This is the company Arduino. This is kind of what they would call the genuine board. And this one, even with the silk screening on the back, is probably fake. In fact, it doesn't have a logo on the front, so it's definitely fake. But basically, I don't really get into the real versus fake, one's better than the other. I have mostly boards from China, and again, people have a lot of opinions about that. I'm just a humble maker. I don't really get involved in all the politics of all of it and stuff like that. But if you want to have some fun, spend a couple of hours reading about Arduino versus Arduino and the history and all that kind of stuff. And so there's a lot going on there that I just don't really get into. I will say that in terms of companies like Arduino the company and Adafruit and DigiKey and all these other companies that are involved in making parts for the Arduino, a lot of them spend a lot of time and money building libraries and things like that. And so I definitely think it's worth supporting those companies, if not with every purchase, at least with some purchases, because they do work that kind of contributes to the whole community. But for our purposes, we're going to basically call anything that is not a ESP8266 or an ESP32, we're going to call it an Arduino. Please don't sue me. I'm just a humble maker. So anyway, this is your basic Uno board, and it has these 13 digital inputs and outputs, and it has, I'm seeing 5 analogs and some other pins. It's got your standard USB A. It can be powered by this jack. It can be powered by this jack. It can be powered by a voltage in over here. It's just your basic everyday maker board. It does what it's supposed to do. It does it over and over and over again, and does it reliably. And if you're getting your first board, this is most likely what you have. And so I've got a few of those. I have one with an LED, single LED hooked up to it. I just keep this here because a lot of times I'm doing a project, and I just, if I want to check if it got input, I have a little LED on it. I've got one here in the package. I have another one over here. So I don't know, I've got maybe 5 Unos here and some other ones around the shop. So in addition to the Uno, there are some other boards that you may want to consider for different purposes. So let's start with what's a lot of people's favorite board is the Nano, and people tend to love these things. I'm going to try to find one. Yeah, here's one that just fresh out of the package. So this is a Nano, and basically if you put these two side by side, they have essentially the same features. They have roughly the same number of analog pins, same number of digital pins, roughly the same amount of memory and all that kind of stuff. Though this has a USB, a micro USB. No, let me try that again. Has a mini USB, which is the one that your dad's BlackBerry had. But other than that, they're essentially the same board, and they have both the same strengths and same weaknesses. I think this one runs at a slower clock speed, but these are great if you need to minimize something. And one of the things I love about the Nanos is sort of the little ecosystem that comes along with it. They have this is a Nano that has been put on top of an Ethernet shield, and so you can see, forget these pins on the bottom here, you can see that basically this is an Arduino with Ethernet in this tiny package. And so great. They also have these bases for them that you can just pop the Nano in this base, and you get these nice screw terminals and all that. They're great boards. They suffer from excuse me, they suffer from a few things. One is a lack of memory. They don't have the same memory as some of the other boards, and a little bit of a lack of speed. Speed usually isn't too much of an issue when it comes to these type of maker boards. But I will say this, one of my favorite things to do is to hook this stuff up to Ethernet. And when I hook it up to Ethernet, I like to use the MQTT protocol. And basically, although you can make a really cool kit with this, and I mentioned this in another video, when you get the Ethernet library and you get the pub sub client, which is what most people use for MQTT, you've basically exhausted all the memory of these two boards before you've even written your first line of code. And so, and sometimes even gone beyond the actual memory. So I've had to go into the pub sub library and take parts of it out so that I could actually get it to install in some of my projects. That said, if you need a little tiny board that just turns something on and off, or reads some sensors and sends some serial data, or you don't need the MQTT client, these are fantastic boards. And so highly recommend that you check those out. They're cheap. So let's take a look at another set of boards, and these are the AT Tiny boards. You can see I've got a little pile of them here. They're cheap also. They maybe run $2 on AliExpress, and these are basically it's not an Arduino. It's a chip that you can buy, this AT Tiny 85 chip, and there's other versions of the AT Tiny, but this is a common one. It's also called a DigiSpark. You'll see a version of it that instead of using the micro USB, basically plugs straight into your USB port. But the deal with these is there's very few pins and very little memory, but what they do is they give you the functions of an Arduino for very simple tasks. And so when I build things like laser tag guns or my duck hunt wall, I love something like this because it's tiny and it allows me to put it inside the Nintendo gun and basically create my own shooting mode. So I can real quickly, I could program this thing and set it up so that you can have semi-automatic, and you can say, hey, I want to make sure they absolutely release the trigger before another time will shoot, or 3-shot burst or automatic or whatever you want to do. excuse me, it's very good for simple input output where I could have built something like that with a 555 IC, but it's just not worth it. This is $2 and it's super simple. Along those same lines, this is the Arduino Pro Mini, and this is a little bit of a higher end small board. Oh, that might be a Pro Micro. No, it's a Pro Mini. Okay. Along those same lines, this is the Arduino Pro Mini, and this one happens to be a 16 megahertz and runs, it does not have a USB port, as you'll notice, no USB port, but basically it has more memory and more pins, and it's, if you need a little bit more horsepower on a tiny board, this is the way to go. I don't use these a ton. You have to program them with either using another Arduino or an FTDI board, or some form of serial USB to serial converter to program this thing. But they're very cool tiny boards. There's another one I don't have pictured that is a Pro Micro, and what's interesting about that one, it looks basically like this one except it has a USB port on it, and that one can emulate a keyboard or mouse. It has a built-in what do they call it, USB host. And so if you ever need to do something like, let's say you have a photo booth and you need to simulate that when you press a big arcade button, it presses a space bar on the computer, that's a perfect thing for that. So one of the things with these Pro Minis, Pro Micros and stuff like that is they often come in both 5 volts and 3 volts, 3.3 volts, and sometimes they come in different frequencies. So when you order these things, pay attention, because you don't want to hook up 5 volt sensors to a 3 volt board, or just things like that. If you're interacting with an ESP8266, you might want a 3 volt version of the board. And so when you order these, it's kind of a little bit of a minefield to make sure. For one thing, Pro Mini, this is the Pro Mini, does not have the USB. Pro Micro has the USB. They both come in 3 and 5 volts and just different variants and stuff like that. So pay attention to which one you're ordering when you're getting these smaller boards. Now, speaking of smaller boards, these two, which I just opened a couple minutes ago for the first time, came straight from Arduino, and they are the second and third Arduino brand name boards that I've ever owned. Funny story, and this is not to bash the company because I'm sure this could have happened with anybody, but the only other time I ordered a brand name Arduino board, literally the first time I plugged it into my laptop, it blew the USB port. And so, and that USB port has never worked to this day, and I still plug stuff into it, and I curse Arduino. No, I'm just kidding. I love Arduino. They do some awesome work. So, but these two seem very cool, and I'm going to plug them into somebody else's laptop first. But no, they're very cool boards, and this one basically takes care of a lot of the downsides of the normal Nano board. So I've got a regular Nano and this new, what do they call it? They call it the Nano Every board. And so I really do, I think, all jokes aside, I think that this is a great product. And the reason why is it's faster, it's 20 megahertz, it's got 48K of flash, which is a lot of flash compared to the other one. I was always running out. This one is also 5 volts, so I haven't confirmed for sure yet, but I think there's a good chance that this one will work with the Ethernet shield. And if this works with the Ethernet shield, then it's a game changer, because this board is $9.90. So you get this tiny package with a lot of flash, a decent amount of RAM. You get 5 volts. You get all the pins and basically the same form factor as this other Nano, except you're going to pay a little bit more for it, but you get a lot more for it. So I think the Arduino Nano Every is a very cool product that I think could be a game changer as far as $10 maker boards. So beyond that $10, you could spend $20 and get this one. And this is the Nano 33 IoT board. And basically the way this one works is this one has built-in Wi-Fi and Bluetooth low energy. And it's based on an Atmel chip. It's similar to an ESP32. This one is built on the AT-SAM D21 board. This runs at 48 megahertz, has 256K of flash, which for a Nano, I mean, that's game changing. 32K of RAM. This one is a 3.3 volt board. And what makes this interesting is that Arduino launched a cloud program. I think it's still in beta. I haven't gotten a chance to use it yet. But one of the things, to step back for a second, one of the things about sending stuff over Ethernet or sending stuff over Wi-Fi is security. To be honest, the IoT industry is not taking security seriously, and no matter which of these Arduinos on this thing, other than this one, if you try, you will not be able to make a TLS connection. They just do not have enough memory. They don't have enough horsepower to process the crypto and things like that. And so you can have all the API keys you want and all that stuff, but essentially you're sending the data in the clear. And so one of the things I love about this board is that talking to them after they developed this thing, but this is crypto first. This board is designed from the beginning to be secure and then to take care of all the other responsibilities. And I haven't had a chance to verify all the claims yet, and I'm looking forward to it. I'll probably do another video of that, but this one has its own crypto chip. It has a decent processor, plenty of memory, and so the thought of being able to take something like this and actually do true TLS connections and securely pass data back and forth, I think is another game changer, and it's $20. And so my opinion is that Arduino, the company, is going hard after a lot of the other, cheapo maker boards, and they're putting these in a price that might make sense to actually buy this as opposed to the knockoff ones from China. So, last but definitely not least is, up to this point, my favorite maker board. And that is, I've got a whole pile of them back here, but that is the Mega. The Mega is everything I love about an Arduino. It's the existing Arduino plus everything back here, which is essentially a bunch more pins, and this processor has a bunch more memory and storage than this processor, and I love these boards. I built my duck hunt on this. There was, I think, 12 of them in my escape room. I love the ability to hook as much stuff as possible up to one of these boards. In fact, I have a project coming up where I am attempting to hook all 37 sensors of one of those 37-in-1 sensor kits up to a Mega. And so basically you'll pay, I've ordered these in bulk, which is kind of why I have so many of them. I paid around $5-6 for these, where these wind up being around $3 or $4. And so for me, when I was buying a bunch of them up front, it just made sense to spend another $1 or so per board and get the Mega. It isn't that much bigger than this one, and you get the extra memory, you get the extra pins and all that kind of stuff. And so I use these for a few things. I have, this one is which obviously I don't need this many pins, but it's nice for the extra memory to have when you're running Ethernet. So this one I have a master translator. So a perfect example, I'll demo this later in another project. But this one receives 433 megahertz signals and sends 433 megahertz signals. And so basically I have these ceiling fans in my house that have non-programmable 433 megahertz signals, and then I have these other switches that I got from China that are not programmable but can send out 433 megahertz signals. So something like this, I'll use this as kind of a master translator, where it'll receive the signal from the switch, translate it into what the fan needs to hear, and send it on. And then on top of that, because it has Ethernet, I can control it from anywhere. I can say ALEXA, turn on living room fan, and it will send out that signal. And so I do the same thing here with infrared. This is another for developing. This is, again, doesn't need a Mega to do this, but this is what I call a universal receiver. So it has an infrared receiver and a and a 433 megahertz receiver on it. So when I'm developing something, I can basically take any kind of remote, figure out what it's putting out, and I can duplicate it. So again, doesn't necessarily require a Mega. It's just my go-to board. It's the one I grab. It's the one I love. It's the one that I've made my biggest projects with and things like that. So if you don't have one and you think you may ever want to hook a whole bunch of stuff up at once, highly recommend checking out the Mega. So that is basically the extent of my Arduino collection. And I hope you enjoyed raiding my lab, and I will see you next Monday with a mystery topic.